Now, when it comes to talking about rum from Venezuela, it's important to note we have got 5 working distilleries in Venezuela. However, we're only really going to talk about 2 of them today because it's pretty much guaranteed that unless you've gone really down your rum journey, you probably won't have heard of any rums coming out of the other 3 distilleries. So the 2 distilleries we're effectively going to talk about today, and I'm not even going to pretend to pronounce the first one's real name, I'm just going to call it DOSO, maybe DUSA, basically responsible for Diplomatico rum. And the other one is Hacienda Santa Teresa, which obviously produces Santa Teresa rum. Now, brands like the other brands you might have heard, because there are quite a few brands from Venezuela, but it's important to note that likes of Pampero is not a distillery. Pampero is merely a brand owned by Diageo, and they buy rums off. I'm not entirely sure which distillery, to be honest, but they just buy rums from one of the distilleries and then sort of blend it up and bottle it as Pampero rum. Now, again, before I go any further, my limited knowledge about Venezuela and a lot of the countries coming over the next few weeks, you know, it is non-existent, my knowledge there to a certain extent. So we do pay homage to this book, and this book is fantastic. The more I read of this, it is just unbelievable. Matt Petrick and his wife Carrie have put this together, all been 100% fact checked. There's nothing that's gone in here that hasn't been fact checked. So that is where predominantly a lot of this information is coming from. Now, Venezuela does have a few regulations that their rum producers must adhere to, but they're kind of very broad and very open. So I'm going to run you through some bullet points that I've got written down here. Firstly, all rum aged in Venezuela must be in oak barrels. Natural sweeteners approved by the health authority are approved, so they can sweeten up their rum if they want to. Hence, we know that essentially from Diplomatico. There's nothing wrong with that. Either you like sweetened rums or you don't like sweetened rums. There's no right or wrong. It's just that some sweeten up, some don't. But here's 2 sort of regulations that do kind of get me intrigued, or kind of conflict a little bit, if you like. So the first one is only caramel can be used to colour up the rum. So for instance, you know, a lot of, we've seen it with on my other channel with a lot of British scratch distillers. They are making a homemade caramel to colour up their rums. Doesn't add that much sweetness at all, because caramel is inherently, can be sweet. You know, caramel syrups can be sweet, but caramel, when you kind of make it, has got that bitter sort of edge to it. So they're not using the caramel to sweeten up, they're using the caramel to colour. Remember, this is in small doses as well to give colour to a rum. But the other thing that's sort of not conflicting, but kind of, well, let me run through it. It says, however, to improve aroma, taste and colour, addition of caramel, fruit macerations, bark, oak chips and other approved substances are allowed. So, you know, while they can only use caramel to colour up, you can colour up your rum using oak chips and fruit and other sort of materials that they've got. Now, reading sort of that again and reading between the lines, basically what I take from that, how to interpret that, is that what they're saying is basically only natural products, natural things. They're only allowed to use natural things to sort of improve taste, improve aroma. So no sort of chemical compounds, if you like bark from a tree, wood chips from barrels, essentially, you know, fruit macerations. We're talking real proper things, not chemical compounds. Now, when we talk about the sugarcane and the molasses, they can only use sugarcane grown in designated regions in Venezuela. And those regions, without going into too much detail, kind of situated around the distilleries. However, because Venezuela do produce a lot of rum, if the molasses, if the sugarcane is in short supply, they are allowed to import that under special circumstances. Basically, the local authority needs to give them permission to do that. And then when we come to talk about the aging, basically barrels must be white oak, minimum of 150 litres, and rum can only be aged but within locality of where the rum is produced. So sort of listening to that, you'll kind of agree that it's not a really strict, which is not GI, but regulations. You know, it's not strict compared to Jamaica and places like that, and Martinique. However, you know, with certainly like improving the taste and aroma, you know, it is basically saying you have to use proper stuff. You can't use chemicals. So that's the rules and regulations out the way. Let's dive into the two distilleries that we're going to talk about now. And we'll start off with DOSO. Now, I don't know whether it is actually called DOSO. It's DUSA. Basically, I'm not even going to pretend to pronounce it. You know what my pronunciations are like. So basically, it is responsible for Diplomatico rum. We have got the white, the Planus up there as well. The distillery was founded in 1959. They use both molasses and sugar cane syrup. They do actually, this shocked me actually, they do have pot and column or continuous stills there as well. I didn't realise they would actually distill rum from pot stills. That totally escaped me. So yeah, pot and column still. When it comes to fermentation, it's essentially 48 hours in open fermented. So to kind of describe that a little bit more, we're seeing that quite a bit actually. Quite a few UK distillers are going down that route as well. Open fermentation basically means fermenting without, whether it's steel vats, whether it's big tanks, whatever, basically without lids in, so the air can get in quite easily. So open to the elements. 48 hours, you know, when we talk about certain other countries, you know, and this is where fermentation and that all around the world has been experimented with. We've seen recently with some of the previous islands and countries we're talking about, it's quite short, 24, in some cases 14 hours, you know, 12 hours, 48 hours, 2 days. But then, you know, compare that with some Jamaican rums and stuff like that, we can get up to 3 weeks, 21 days. So fermentation of roughly 48 hours is nothing compared to those rums. But it is important to note, because of the pot and the column stills, because of their styles of rum, again, they can produce medium, heavy and light-bodied rums. Don't think that just because they are, we've got to stop doing this, got to stop calling them Spanish style rums, but because we naturally think they are lighter rums. They're not. They do produce some heavier body rums. Now in this book, there's some fantastic pictures of the stills in here. We've got 2 pot stills and they both have a double retort on them, and they're both 5,000 litres. And they've got a kettle which produces, so the pot stills obviously produce the heavier rum. They've got a kettle still, they've got 2 kettle stills actually. They are flipping huge. One's 45,000 litres, the other is 60,000 litres. And that produces more of their medium rum. But when it comes to volumes, listen to this. As a distillery, they can produce 24 million litres of rum a year. 24 million litres. Again, you know, you might sort of think, for anyone getting into rum, you might think your big countries like Barbados and Jamaica and all that. You know, 24 million litres, that's a flipping lot. So that sort of clears up Diplomatico. We can move on to Hacienda Santa Teresa, if you like. Again, these are the only 2 rums I've really sort of had from Santa Teresa. Again, it's another doing these whole sort of chats and research about islands in different countries. It does make me think, actually, do you know what? I should try more Diplomatico rums. I should try more Santa Teresa rums. But anyway, talking about Santa Teresa, again, they do use pot and column stills, but they are entirely molasses distillery, and they can produce 18 million litres of rum a year. So not quite at Diplomatico's levels, but not far off. Now, here's something as well, because the actual distillery was built in 1978, but you realise that Santa Teresa, 1796, that's when the company was founded. But the distillery that's in situ now was built and commissioned in 1978. So it's a newish distillery. Now, we can give you some interesting knowledge bombs, again, a bit, but predominantly due to this book, but other bits of research that I've done as well. Santa Teresa actually kind of use their fermentation to distinguish the types of rum that they're going to make. Now, I'll explain what I mean by that. I can't kind of give you succinctly in 2 sentences, so I'm going to kind of explain how I mean it. So instead of like columns would produce lighter rums, pots would produce heavier rums, etc. While they do have pot and columns, what they do is they use the ferments to kind of make the different rums, and it's fermentation times on this. So again, as I say, molasses. Once the molasses and the wash is fermented, they then pasteurize that to get rid of all the wild yeast. So they don't want any elements of that. You know, wild yeast, you kind of get those sort of funk notes essentially from it. So they want to get rid of all that. So the rum is pasteurized. Now, to create a light rum, they use a wash that's been fermented for 14 hours All right, so again, opposite to Diplomatico, 48 hours. 14 hours produces some of their lighter rums. But I think it's 14 days. They can let that ferment go for 14 days, and that was the stuff that they will use to create the heavier rums. Now, on researching the aging of this actually kind of opened my eyes a little bit, because we do sort of class this, that basically Santa Teresa and Diplomatico, actually, they don't use age statements. Again, they're all about the blending of rums. There's no age statements. There's no sort of, this is a 3-year-old, this is a 8-year-old. They don't do anything like that. Now, we've always naturally assumed, without deep diving, you've always naturally assumed that that is all down to Solera aging, and it is. But they actually use 2 methods of aging, which actually does intrigue me. So kind of in both of these rums, we actually have a split of properly aged rums. And I don't mean properly that Solera is not, but you know what I mean, sort of rum in a barrel being set aside to age. So we've got half aged rums and then half Solera rums. But the Solera system actually intrigues me quite a bit as well. So basically, to deep dive into the Solera system, the Solera was started in 1992. They've essentially got 4 tiers of the Solera system. So, you know, rum goes into the top, it's taken from the bottom. So then you fill up from the third, you fill the bottom tier up with the third tier, you fill the third tier up with the second tier, and then you fill the second tier up for the first tier, and you add rum into the top again when you're kind of making your rum. So it started in 1992. So for all this length of time, you know, you cannot give a specific age statement to it, of course not. But when rum's blended away, you will naturally have a certain element of rum that's kind of 30, 35 years old, essentially, in those barrels. You know, it's not a 35-year-old rum, but there will be some element of that has been sitting in there since 1992. So basically, to reiterate how, just take that 1796, for instance, and they'll obviously do this en masse, not per bottle. But essentially, what I'm basically saying is, half of that bottle will have come out of rums that have been aged separately in a barrel, like you would do in Barbados, like you would do in Jamaica, like you would do here in the UK, wherever, you know, like rum's being aged. So half of that will be aged rum in there. The other half of that will be from that bottom 4th tier of that Solera system. But just to bring this all round to this sort of 18 million litres of rum, you know, they do have 21 different sites. So Santa Teresa have 21 different sites around the distillery where barrels are aging, and they've got over 100,000 barrels of rum aging. So I think you can agree that actually, just on surface level, just bare sort of surface knowledge, Venezuelan rums, I think for me, do need kind of a little bit more sort of depth, and I kind of want to go in, like maybe even getting some different Diplomatico rums, looking at the rest of the Santa Teresa rums. It's kind of really got me intrigued. There is another brand coming out. It's sort of loosely around. I think I've seen it quite big in Germany. They were at Rumfest in 2022, the proper Rumfest, you know, not the rum show or anything like that, London Rumfest. They were there, but Rum Regulations, that is another sort of another Venezuelan rum. Again, don't have too much knowledge of that. I don't know whether that's a brand like Pampero or whether that's coming out of one of the other 3 distilleries. I'm not sure, but as I say, there is very little to no knowledge about those other 3 distilleries in Venezuela. But if you've got any knowledge, drop that into the comments below, because I do like my my Venezuelan rum. I'm open and honest. I prefer the Familia to the sort of Reserva because it is a bit less sweet, but it's a really, really good rum.